We have a very interesting question here from a new subscriber asking, how they can express a view of a possible Brexit breakthrough coming up in September. How can we look to position ourselves for that potential move happening, and how can we look to trade it? Now, obviously, from the currency side, the first area that we want to focus on is, of course, the pound versus the US dollar. Now, this trade right now, if we just go to something like the H4, we've just had a massive rally, obviously driven on the back of a weaker dollar. We've seen the pound push up recently quite excessively. We've now broken through a key weekly trend line to the upside, currently above that 132 important resistance. And if we do, obviously, we'll need to see where the pound is trading at that time. But looking for a topside target, if there's any type of deal to be had, looking for a potential, depending on where we are at that time, for a potential spike up to 136, ultimately even up to 140, 142, 144, I don't think would be that surprising if you're looking at that medium term perspective, like you said, or a longer term perspective, not looking for a short day trade, but just looking at a more longer term thing, something that you can put into the market and let it run for a while. Depending on where we are, I think a good target for cable, like you asked, can be close to 142, 144, depending on what happens to the dollar, of course, depending on the outperformance narrative of the rest of the world versus the US economy. That is something that we'll obviously need to revisit. But if a breakthrough is to be had, they reckon it's going to happen in September. So it's a month away. So I'm not seeing the pound ending 136 by that time. Obviously, I can be wrong with that. We might be trading at that levels. Don't really see that happening with the fundamental backdrop right now. But as long as we're above that weekly trend line, if we do get that breakthrough, first target, easy target, I think would be 135 in the medium term, and in the longer term, 144. But to be honest, with this rally we've seen in the pound, even though I would expect upside from a breakthrough deal in the pound, I wouldn't really look to trade as a core position on as you ask, from a medium to longer term position. I wouldn't really look to trade something like the pound currency. Really, the one area that I think can really outperform in terms of a medium to longer term position, if we get a deal, is looking at something like the FTSE. So if we take a look at the UK 100, if we just compare this to the S&P, right? So let's open up the S&P on the daily, and we've basically reached the levels, the all-time high levels. So we've recovered the entire COVID-19 drop already. If we compare this to something like the Euro stocks, for example, let's go to the daily. Even though we haven't retraced all the way to the upside, we've had a fair decent run and recovery of that drop. Let's compare that to something like the DAX. So if we go to the DAX and look at the daily, we can see very healthy move to the upside, almost reaching that all-time high for the DAX as well. Now, if we compare that to something like the FTSE 100 and we go to the daily, it's a very different picture. So this one view for me is the reason why I'm a little bit skeptical of this rally we've had in the pound recently. From an equity point of view, markets aren't buying into the optimism that we're seeing in the pound right now. And for me, if there is a deal to be had in September or November or whatever, I think the ultimate trade for me from a medium to longer term position would be a catch-up trade in something like the UK 100 or the FTSE. Catching up to some of its peers, like the S&P, like the Euro stocks, like the DAX. Nasdaq obviously is in a little bit of a different league right now in terms of performance since COVID. But if we just compare it to the S&P and the DAX and something like the Euro stocks, I think this will be a great catch-up trade. With a deal in mind, with a deal in the bag, I think placing a first target at that 7,000 level can be achievable. In a medium term trade. Now, that's something that, as you asked, it's not a short-term one that you'll need to stress about and what happens if this happens and if that happens. It's a medium to longer term trade, something that you can take as a type of position trade, and you just let that run to the upside. Obviously, there'll be oscillations on the way there, but I think if a deal is to be had, this is a good type of catch-up trade to focus on for the FTSE 100. I think that will be an area where I'll be more overweight compared to the British pound. Even though I do expect the British pound to gain, I think there's a lot more catch up, a lot more value to be had in something like the FTSE when compared to the pound with this recent rally we've seen in sterling. So I hope that helps. Any other questions, don't hesitate to let us know.